Over the past few years, everything has changed. Where and how we work and live, the way we collaborate and measure success, and the emerging technologies we use to get it all done. Welcome to The Bridge. Join our host, Scott Kinka, in a series of discussions with top leaders in technology and learn about how they bridge their lives and their businesses into our new hybrid work and AI-driven reality. Our hope is that the insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepointe Technologies, the nation's leading IT advisory firm. Bridgepointe helps business leaders evaluate, procure, implement, and manage technology and customer experience solutions with a focus on realizing sustainable results for your business growth. And now, here's your host, Scott Kinka.
Cybersecurity and risk management are kind of like the chicken or the egg, right? What comes first in cyber, product or policy? Innovation or uptime? Auto updates or careful testing? Have recent major disruptions around the globe led us to rethink our kind of typical pace over process ethos in IT? My guest on this episode is Melanie Thomas. She's Bridgepointe's VP of Cybersecurity, and she's an adjunct professor in the Master of Science in Cybersecurity Operations and Leadership program at the University of San Diego. She also practices radical kindness and optimism. And yet her belief is that change doesn't need to be scary, but in light of recent events, it's necessary. Together, we discussed the recent CrowdStrike events and the potential reckoning that it may cause in the way we think about all of our own internal IT operations. If this discussion and others like it with IT leaders and visionaries is helpful as you think about your business, please be sure to hit that subscribe or like button wherever you're getting this content. Of course, comments and 5-star ratings are always appreciated. Now, let's get to the question. What IT leaders like you should take away from one of the darker days in recent IT history? With my guest, Bridgepointe Technologies, Melanie Thomas. Well, hello from wherever you're listening, and welcome to another episode of the Bridgecast. My guest should be familiar to some of you, those of you who are fans and regular listeners of the show. Joining us today is Melanie Thomas. She's the Vice President of Cybersecurity here at Bridgepointe. What's unique is when we had Melanie on the show last time, she was not with Bridgepointe, so we're thrilled to have her here. Melanie, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. We'll get into a little bit of that job change and you joining over here, but Melanie was on the show probably about 6 months ago at the time we're recording this. I'm not exactly sure when we're going to go live with the episode. And I really wanted to have Melanie on for two reasons. One, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of her legacy, her background, and why she's now here at Bridgepointe. Just talk about what we're seeing in the market a little bit on the security side. And then lastly, I think we, can't have an episode like this right now. We are 2 weeks removed from the CrowdStrike incident, let's call it, for want of a better term. Melanie wrote a great blog on that I want to explore a little bit, and we'll include a link to that blog as a reference point in the liner notes. But I want to get right into it. Melanie, thanks for being on the show. You are how long here at Bridgepointe now?
A couple months in, just about 2 months in.
Fantastic. It's been an eventful 2 months, given some things that have gone on, which we'll get into. Melanie, give us a little bit on your background before Bridgepointe. Obviously, you're serving as the VP of Cybersecurity here now, but tell us a little bit before you got here.
So before I was here, and like you mentioned, I was with AT&T Cybersecurity, which is now effectively Level Blue, with that breakout from their cyber side from the man that is AT&T. Now Level Blue is its own entity. So when I was there, I was a principal cyber engineer, worked with a couple different managed services. So really had the opportunity to work with a lot of different vendors, a lot of different customers, some larger contracts, some smaller contracts. So I had a chance to work with customers from multiple managed services, incident response, all of that. Very fun cybersecurity side with the hands-on. Set me up really well, I think, to come into Bridgepointe and look at the technology and engineering side for customers as well. From a vendor agnostic point of view now. Yeah.
I'm sure you're glad you weren't sitting on the sock there when the CrowdStrike thing happened this past week. That would have been a fun or 2 weeks.
Absolutely. I got some things from some coworkers. Like, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this right now.
Right. But I mean, you were effectively you were a lot of things there. You were training, you were
hmm
product, you were, involved in all of those, but you were also eyes on glass. I mean, you were involved in incident
hmm
response on these types of things there, the kind of things that frankly our listeners had to deal with 2 weeks ago and are dealing with, frankly, largely every day, right?
Right, right.
Got it. You also have an interesting history in education. Tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis there.
I do. So education wise, within AT&T, we did a lot of trainings. We did customer trainings on different technologies, trained with our threat hunters, our SOC, our engineers on provisioning services, on running the services, all the very fun things. On the education side, I'm still with University of San Diego. So I'm still a professor there with their Master's in Cybersecurity Operations and Leadership program as well. So very excited. We just redid a couple of courses. I just taught my first course that I developed in Blue Team Fundamentals. Very, very fun. Lots of hands-on labs, all that great stuff. So a lot of things that, regardless of where you are in your career, you should probably keep up on anyway. So kind
Yeah.
of reminding people, especially when we have situations like CrowdStrike, everyone needs to be aware of what's going on in their environment. Everyone needs to be aware of what these teams do on a day-to-day basis because it can get really complicated really quickly.
Tell me about, I mean, who's in that program? I guess is kind of do you have a lot of kind of return learners coming in for a master's in cybersecurity, or are they sort of straight line out of undergrad?
It's interesting. It's only a couple that we get straight out of undergrad that go straight from that kind of program into
Yeah.
this master's program. A lot of what we have are people who are transitioning from other technologies into cybersecurity. So maybe they've
Right.
been a sysadmin, maybe they've been, GRC, that kind of thing, but really want to focus in on cyber. We have some people that are already pretty established in their career as well. So people who are already directors of security or CISOs. We've had a couple people who are already in the C level go through the program as well. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting. So this program gets a very holistic point of view for cybersecurity, but really meant to really help you in your career regardless of where you come from. Get into some of those management positions and really understand things like blue chip fundamentals, cyber intel, forensics, things like that. In addition to the very real business cases like we're seeing with CrowdStrike, right? The CEO
Yeah.
has to now go to Congress, things like that, or the House of Representatives. So
Right.
lots of things that really tie in business to technology. Yeah.
It feels to me a little bit almost like an MBA, right? Where you've got sort of people that are coming straight out of B school, and then you've got executives returning.
hmm
It's just sort of practical in-world education that is, super pertinent and timely as it stands right now. You're also, Melanie, a Hope Punk fan. We talked a little bit about that on the last episode, which we will link in the liner notes. But Ted, can you define what that is? A little bit about Hope Punk?
Absolutely. So Hope Punk is a radical movement of kindness and optimism and really staying on the positive side that, change doesn't have to be scary, right? Change can be very optimistic. You can move forward. And it's also very punk rock, right? It's very,
Yeah.
metal, not metal, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's very radical. It's very fun. It's very dynamic, and it's a very good way, I think, to approach life. And same thing approaching this right CrowdStrike when we have events, when we have incidents that yes, there's going to be a lot of emotion, right? There's going to be a lot of anger, things like that, but it can still move forward and change and evolve.
Healthy way of looking at it when you're staring at a screen some days, right? I mean, in particular with events
Absolutely,
like this. You've been
absolutely.
before we jump right into the CrowdStrike thing. I mean, just give me. You've been at Bridgepointe here for a couple of months. You obviously were on the customer
Mhm.
facing side at AT&T. Now Level Blue. Um, just give me a state of the state. Like you talk to an average, mid market CIO or CISO. Although I think most mid market, businesses are probably doing a fractional or it's an also
Mhm.
job with the director of IT. Um,
Mhm.
where are we? I mean, are we at a point of maturity and acceptance? Are we still chasing the ball? Like, obviously security is always a catch up game, right? But are we at least
Mhm.
understanding and accepting that role? Or are we still very much in the holy crap, what should I be doing mode with a lot of businesses? What's your just high level opinion on that?
I think we are definitely moving into the more
Yeah.
mature conversations, right? There's fewer times that we're seeing now where customers come in and say, I don't have anything of security. Tell me what I need.
Yeah.
It's more they have an idea, they know why it's important. They might have one or two tools that they've been able to implement. I think one of the really big benefits of that is that you see a lot of MSPs and MSSPs really starting to help create packages and bundles of just kind of basic solutions that everyone should have. And then you have, some of the customers that are like, great, I have Microsoft. Awesome. Let's talk about Security Center. Let's talk about everything that can come with, inside of your Microsoft, managed yourself or not.
Yeah.
But I think we see a lot of opportunity there. And so luckily, we've definitely progressed into some of these larger conversations of, now we can talk about some of the shinier tools that they might need to help their security kind of cross over that line. A component of that is absolutely cyber insurance too, right? We see what happened with CrowdStrike. That could be cyber related, but likely not. But a lot of people who are seeing, wow, everything is connected, and we're going to have to start having some of these harder conversations.
Do you find, you mentioned, sometimes you go and it's like, hey, we have these one or two things, right? And I think it's always the chicken or the egg conversation, right? Right? Is it like strategy and policy first, then implementation, or is it, try and go through a couple of best of breed tools in there? I have my own opinion, but I'm curious, like, where are people when you meet with them? Is it more often that, hey, we've done a couple of things, but we need to take a step maybe backwards to just figuring out what we're trying to solve and build policy and governance and then get it all the way forward? Or are you sort of in the mode where they know what they want to do, they just need help to do it?
It's more of they've bought a few of the best in breed tools, right? They see the need. They're like, great, that's a great price point. Let's try to implement it. And then let's look back and see, let's make this change our policy, right? Let's look at some of the other procedures that we need to do to operationalize that. So you see that very firsthand in the provisioning of some of these services. They aren't maybe provisioned very well, right? They didn't know it had that feature. They didn't know that they could do this kind of thing with it. Some of it's kind of exploring what they already purchased. Let's not maybe buy something new. Let's make the most of what you already have. At the same time, these policies and procedures, especially things like disaster recovery and incident response, if you don't have the tools provisioned correctly, you're still going to be, on the bad side of that fence whenever something bad happens. So it's a little bit of a mix. I'd like to see more preparation. I'd like to see people already have an idea of their policies and procedures and have that govern more and influence their decisions on tool sets. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's a decree, right? You have to have this, and they buy it and then figure it out.
Yeah. Check the box because it's come down from the board or because it's come from a customer that you've got to have an X or Y. Totally get that. And I think that's an incredible segue, right, into maybe the broader conversation. You'd like to see maybe a little bit more governance and kind of policy around, I've got a thing, but I don't know how to run a thing, or it's not sort of part of a larger story. And I think quite a bit about, we're 2 weeks now to the day when we're recording this removed from the CrowdStrike incident. And I think a lot of the, let's take, CrowdStrike's mistake or whatever it was we want to call it at this point. I don't think that we have it categorized completely. Just take that off to the side for a moment. I think a lot of the discussion that I've been involved in has sort of been a reckoning on policies and procedures and on DR and on edge strategies and things of that nature. So it's an interesting parallel to what it is that you just said. Before we jump down into the details, and obviously everybody's got a turn on this story. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you for your turn. Like, what happened, at least as it relates to the information, and Melanie, that you've been able to compile and that you feel comfortable representing? What happened a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So what this was, from the best of information that we have in general, is that it was a incremental update that did not contain the files it needed to actually run. So part of it is that a lot of endpoint technologies, and so when we talk about them in general, you have the higher level conversation, right, starts with, well, you need security, right, and you need to be fast to be able to respond to active attacks, right? Things update all the time. And so you have a lot of these EDR vendors who have just incremental updates, right? So it's not a full agent update, which is typically what updates the kernel, right? The kernel is a very important core component of your Windows programming. And so when you touch the kernel, it's usually going to be a larger update. It's going to have other things, other validations involved with it, right? And you need it on the kernel level to start from boot, all those great things. And so when they pushed up this incremental update, it was full of invalid fields, right? And so when the kernel tried to start up, the data it needed wasn't there, and it blue screened, right? Because we touched the kernel and you potentially cause a lot of issues. And if they're not the first vendor to do that, of course, this is very, very widespread. There have been other updates and issues with, the way Microsoft doesn't want to play nice sometimes, or playing nicer now, with a lot of EDR vendors in particular. I think
Yeah.
we'll see that very much so moving forward. But when you have these kind of incremental updates enabled on your endpoints, cool, right? You want those tiny little updates to happen frequently. It looks good to a board, right? Cool. We're constantly updating. We don't need these major big, version updates every once in a while. But that's kind of the risk you run when you allow that, right? So if you
Yeah.
really want everything to be updated as fast as possible, you have to kind of accept that that's something that could possibly happen. And so when the fields were empty, it didn't allow anything to start up.
Got it. So it should have been low touch, and that was incremental, meaning that the
Hmm.
core kernel software wasn't being updated, but the core kernel software was looking for, you know, file definitions that may be, frankly,
Hmm.
updated attacks, things, you know, the things that are consistently changing that the software is looking for. It couldn't boot effectively. So
Hmm.
okay, so that makes sense. So, and maybe we don't know this answer yet, but I'm just going to ask the question. Um, how we ruled out that there was anything cybersecurity, you know, attack vector related in this process, or just is this pure QA, you know, problem on the, side of CrowdStrike?
It's pure QA. So it's pure
Okay.
software development. I don't think anyone's had any kind of indicators. I think it's easier to jump to that, right? Insurance wise, it's easier to say, oh, this is cyber potentially malicious. I think here we're seeing lack of QA, maybe lack of other processes and code review
Yeah.
before that fact, lack of maintaining a really significant testing environment that is a good representation of what they
Yeah.
need to test. And so I think that just, when you get a little, appetite toward those kinds of normal procedures, right? If this is something they push out multiple times a week, maybe it
Mm.
failed on a couple of tests, but they're still going to push it. And I think this is kind of a result of, just maybe falling into a little bit of that hole.
Yeah. So I think there's in the what happens next, there's probably two sides to that discussion, right? The one is
Hmm.
on the side of the provider, on the side of the software maker. There's I mean, I've been developing software and been in companies have done it for almost my entire career, and there's always this like, you know, uh, push and pull. There's always this pressure between kind of, customer success and unbridled innovation, right? Like there's this like built-in tension. In fact, it came up on a couple episodes ago. I forget which episode it was. I think it was with Pete Eisengram from Evolve IP. We got into this like whole unbridled innovation is basically the genesis of kind of bad process, right? Or
Hmm.
future tech debt, if you will, right? Now, granted, this was an
Yes.
incremental update, so it's probably less of an argument there. But I think that's the one side, right? The one side is sort of facing those suppliers, frankly, of ours, right, and providers of ours who are responsible for
Mhm.
making sure people's operating systems run with leveraging the software that they have. And I think the other question is really, as the user, how do we think about just clicking the update button? Like, is this changing where we're at mentally? So let's address both, and I'll take both. Like, is this a wake up call
Mhm.
in the supplier ecosystem related to how swiftly, how adeptly, we're updating software?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And I think for anyone, and kind of similar, right? I worked for a company that talked about violent execution in their software development. And I
Mm,
was like, no, 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 I hate that entire term. He's going to laugh when he watches this. But, and that's what we're seeing, right? Is you have some people on the side of, like myself, I'm very risk averse when it comes to software updates because things like this can happen. And so I think a lot of vendors on the other side of that, they see, oh, well, we need to respond to the market faster. We need to push this faster. We need to tell people that we're doing this faster. And so I think a lot of vendors now are going to be like, well, maybe we should take a step back. Maybe we should take a little bit more time to test things, time to release things, which of course, time is money, right? And so what does that mean when you have kind of some of those imbalances?
yeah. I think time is security too, right? It's harder.
Yeah,
I think it's one thing if you're a SaaS offering, right? It's, if you're Salesforce and you
right.
pushed it, yes, we can't process an order, we can't do it. Like, I get it. when you're a piece
Hmm.
of software that's driving off of the kernel of an operating system of every machine, 80% of the machines in the world, it's completely different level, which I get, it's hard, but I
Hmm.
understand the reckoning. Let's talk the other side. You're a customer. Does this change the way you
Hmm.
think about just pressing the update button? Automatic updates. Let's
I
go.
hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
Please, please,
Tell
please.
me
Yes,
more.
yes, yes. So ultimately the customer is the one responsible, right? So we see these lawsuits coming out from the shareholders, for example, against CrowdStrike. But when we look at it, well, or Delta, for example, Delta
Yeah.
Airlines is suing now CrowdStrike and Microsoft for 500 million in loss, which makes sense, right? These numbers are going to continue to come out through the next course of weeks, potentially months, as this fallout continues to happen. But at the same time, when you implement software, especially security software, you kind of also are coming into a joint agreement with the vendor. Like, I trust you to not blow up my environment. At the same time, you accept that risk of you're installing it in your environment, right? Your teams, whether it's definitely on the customer side. If you have a managed service, it's partly theirs. And you also have the vendor. So it's a shared kind of responsibility. And so I think it'll be interesting as we see some of these lawsuits is that, yeah, customers really want to be asking these kinds of questions when they implement any kind of software, when you talk to vendors, if they're monitoring your logs, right? Ask them how often they update their backend. If you can have release notes or notification when those kinds of updates happen, because something like this could absolutely, impact all of those things. So
Yeah.
some technologies, of course, are less of a priority, right? Less of an impact when something big does happen. But a lot of security software is, like you mentioned, on the edge. If you push a bad update, if you can't get the internet to your workforce, you're hard
Yeah.
done, right? You got to be able to fix that. And telecom, right? ISP providers, they all kind of understand what the risk is and the weight on their shoulders when they accept those kinds of responsibilities, right? That's what they do. So I think we're going to see prices go up for softwares that are, for technologies that are really
Mm,
consistent. I
yeah.
hate to see things that like, we have 100% uptime. And I'm like, I don't think about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can actually do that. Yeah. So it's fun to kind of joke about it at the same time. Like when you're critical infrastructure, right? I think we're going to see regulations get a little bit more stringent. I think we're going to see insurance providers, cyber insurance providers in particular, really start doubling down on those kinds of requirements.
Comment
So
specifically on this.
I hope they're thinking one, two, three times about pushing that update button.
Yeah. So, super interesting. I think you and I also had a conversation last week. We were really beating this up. Um, and we talked a little bit about how it does it also change our feelings on edge, like on the computers we have, the devices we have in the field. I mean, this was a kernel level update, for those who are maybe not all the way following along at home, thinking like it only is affecting a device that is running an operating system, in the field. And of course, yeah, that's dramatic when it's the device that we're doing this on, like my workstation. But, we saw the effects of just bricking, displays in airports and really basic applications in retail. And, I make no bones about it. I've talked about it on the show a lot. I am a big fan of virtual desktop infrastructure, of thinking about thin clients. Like, a thick device should be in a thick scenario. A thin device should be in a thin scenario. And, to hear like, well, the airlines needed to touch 10,000 devices. And I'm like, well, yes, CrowdStrike had a problem, but that's a flaw intrinsically in design, that you can't put people on airplanes because they can't see when they got to go get to the gate. Like that is the dumbest machine you could possibly imagine in the simplest environment that should be going on. Like, are we going to have a reckoning in your mind? I'm sitting here holding, a reasonably thin device. Like, are we going to rethink how thick the devices that we use in the field are because of this too? Is that going to change in your mind?
I hope so. I actually hope so. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot of these organizations are also, struggling with a lot of their own tech debt, right? They have super old, it costs millions and millions of dollars to replace kiosks and
Yeah.
displays and the systems behind them. So I think as we get more into virtualization, we look more into like hyper virtualization of things. I hope, right, that we see more things that are centrally controlled. So something that you can just change the master image, push it out to all the child images, and then
Yeah.
not have everything hard down, everything needing to be replaced. You still are going to have hardware issues, right? You're still going to have, displays
Of
still have
course.
hardware, they still have power, all that great stuff. But I would like to see more centralization of images like that and just kind of more control. It's complicated. It's slightly more expensive in some ways, cheaper in
Yeah.
others. But it's important, especially when you're working off of, increasingly smaller staff. So with more
Yeah.
automation, right? People are thinking, oh, well, that's going to replace me as a human. You're like, well, situations like this, you needed as many humans as you could possibly get to get their hands in those machines. So when you
Yeah.
look at that balance too, you're like, well, you can have one or the other, but you still need both, right? And that still needs to be strategized. That still needs to be planned for.
Sure. Well, and also, I mean, really even getting down to like what can be running off of mobile operating systems when it's a device that's not
Hmm.
going to be touched all the time. Like, if those
Right.
kiosks were running off of a mobile OS at an airport, then, when the thick operating system, the full Windows operating system went through a disastrous kernel update, those would not have been affected. Like, I think the variance, not just the variance in device approach will also vary potentially. The operating system approach, the distribution approach, as you said, like, yeah, it should have been, well, this kernel blew up, but I've got X thousands of machines out there that are running virtually that I can just update one time and push. If,
Hmm.
if there was more of that going on, yes, this still would have been a disastrous event, but it wouldn't have been disastrous at the level that it was, right? We're just, because in a
Right.
lot of cases, there's, you know, big hardware being brought to small applications. So I hope it's a
Hmm.
reckoning on that as well. Well, this has been super interesting. There's a lot. I don't want to steal all the thunder from your blog entry. There's a little bit more detail in that. Obviously, if you'd like to talk to Melanie about this, we'll have Melanie's contact information. She's on LinkedIn. She's here to help customers through this thought leadership as we go on the Bridgepointe side of the house. But we're thrilled to have Melanie here on the Bridge. Melanie, I want to have a couple just fun questions before we let you go. All right.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Let's do
All
it.
right. So let me see what's in here. First off, I did this to you 6 months ago, so it's probably a little bit unfair, but I need a shameless prediction from you. Maybe it comes from this incident, but give me something next 12 to 18 months.
Next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to see. Oh, CrowdStrike's going to apologize if we stay with an industry. I think my last prediction was Taylor Swift related, and I think I was wrong. But I think industry wise, I think we're going to see, because Black Hat's coming at us in a couple of weeks. So I think here in the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see some vendors overpromise and they're going to get burned. I think we're going to see some smaller vendors who do have a little bit more ability to be agile in their development really, really start to shine. And then rounding up that 18 months, we're probably going to see those big guys swallow the small guys.
Interesting. So it'll drive a little bit of consolidation because the risk
Hmm.
level on the smaller side is increased dramatically. And okay, that's an interesting one. Um, I asked you this 6 months ago. I don't recall the answer at this time, but I'll go back and make sure that I do when I go through my notes at the end of this. But what are you reading right now? What's on Melanie's end table?
Oh, I just started a new book. So it's called The Humans by
Okay.
Matt Haig. He wrote The Midnight Library, which is a really amazing book. But it's about an alien that's coming to blow up Earth and starts learning what it's like to be a human. And then, our redeeming qualities as humans, right? As we go through our journeys and our lives and adventures.
That
It's
is
pretty interesting.
very
It's very funny.
super on brand for you with the Hope Punk story. I got it. I can see that it's in your reading as well. All right, I have some fun business level questions here. I'm going to pick out a good one for you. Hang on. All right, well, tell me about the biggest mistake you've made as a technology leader.
Oh, um, we all make mistakes. I've made lots
Sure.
of mistakes. What's one of the biggest mistakes I've made? Uh,
Completely put you on the spot.
I, it's good. It's good. I like it. Um, I was at an organization responsible for creating some very important things for a board of directors meeting. Completely lost track of that, got very distracted, and completely missed the board of directors meeting, completely did not provide that deliverable, and have been a very type A person ever since. So
Got it.
it was a big
You're
one.
never gonna make
So
that mistake. How are
never made
you?
that mistake ever again.
How do you deal with that? Are you a list maker? Are you, do you keep priorities? Like, how are Melanie's big rocks organized in your head? Like, what did that
Very big
change
list
about the way you're
maker.
operating as an executive?
Very big into lists.
Okay.
I organize my calendar like it's my job. So if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. I put work time on my calendar. I put when things are due. I put prep time before meetings. I put, weeks in advance, start drafting out and brainstorming things. So I'm a really big procrastinator in some things. So if it's a big deadline like this board of directors meeting, I'm like, oh, I work better under pressure. I'm going to work great as soon as I'm going to, really, really blast it out right before this, and it's going to be awesome. Something comes up, I get distracted, and it just doesn't happen. So a lot of planning. I color coordinate my calendar for different things so I know where my brain needs to be. And just kind of allowing myself that time. So definitely something I've learned in my professional journey.
We organize ourselves similarly. I color code my calendar. That's a big tip. I think scheduling work time is really important. I've heard that tip quite a bit, and it's easy with Office 365, which is what we use internally. I mean, you can just say like schedule X number of hours for me per week. If I don't do that, I can't get the big stuff done. And then thank you, by the way, for making me feel like I'm behind because I owe stuff for the board of directors meeting, which we have in a couple of weeks. So thankfully I have some focus time scheduled after this recording to get to it. Melanie, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I think, hopefully this 28 minutes so far will, our listeners will understand why we were so happy to add you to our team. We're super thrilled. This will not be the last time. We're hoping to get you back often. And, we're going to continue featuring your blog entries. Melanie's a great writer. She's going to be commenting on what's going on. Certainly someone to follow in this industry. Melanie, we're thrilled to have you, and we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you. I look forward to it. It was very fun. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Can't wait to come back.
Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we're appreciative of Bridgepointe Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation, or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepointe, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out bridgepointetechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepointe, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps give us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there in business and in life. Do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.